Conversation, sponsored by the Robey Theatre Company. Now, tonight's guest is an acclaimed actor, director, and activist. He earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his memorable performance as Farmer Hoggett in the international smash Babe, and went on to play the role in the hit sequel Babe, Pig in the City, I apologize. Other memorable motion picture works include the Academy Award-winning phenomenon The Artist, The Longest Yard, I, Robot, Green Mile, the Oscar-nominated film The Queen, Secretariat, Spider-Man 3, and LA Confidential, among many, many others. We have the pleasure of having an evening conversation with the incredible Mr. James Cromwell. Hello, Jamie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time that you're going to spend with us this evening, and I want to remind everyone that there will be a Q&A afterwards, so please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered. You'll be called on, we'll call on you, and we'll go in the order in which it was received until we're out of time. So, Jamie, firstly, I just want to say that artwork behind you is absolutely stunning. I love it. Can you tell me the story behind it?
When I was in Australia doing Babe, I took a trip to the middle of Australia to Alice Springs and discovered Aboriginal art, which I loved, and started to buy Aboriginal art in Australia. And then I shot a picture up in Vancouver and got to know a little bit of Northwest Indian. This was one of my first pieces. I looked to see whether the artist had written his name on the back. I believe it's Ida, which is a Northwest Indian. It could be Tlingit, I'm not sure. He didn't sign it, so obviously it's some piece that a beginner carver, or I don't know, he might be a really good carver. I happen to like the piece. So it's just my fascination with Aboriginal art, all Aboriginal art. It's the only art that really speaks to me. I have some wonderful pieces from Australia and from the North. I have a lot of masks. I like the masks a lot. Of course, as an actor, that's sort of in our wheelhouse.
You know, it really is. It really is. I actually have some masks that were given to me, and I go back and forth about, should I give them to Goodwill? Should I keep them? I'm going to send them to you.
Oh, fine. Please. I thank you very much. I love masks.
Well, you have great taste in art. That piece is really special. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Well, I'm going to jump right in. And there, this is, as you know, it's the time that we have right now, with everything that's happening between COVID-19, post George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement, the election coming up. There's so much happening. And we at the Robey Theatre Company feel that it's very, very important that we have a conversation with whomever we can have a conversation with, that we have this dialogue and possibly affect change. So that's what it's all about, in whatever ways that we're able to do it. So, I'm just going to jump right in. And I mean, just now correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that you worked for the Black Panthers back in the 60s.
I did. The Committee to Defend the Panthers, to try to get the Panther 13 out of jail before they were killed, because that was the idea of getting them in jail in the first place. So we would raise bail money and bail them out sort of one at a time. Usually they went to Algeria to be with Eldridge. Of course, it was a setup. A lot of really interesting story about political education class with the Panthers, which was really something. Well,
can you get into one? I would love to hear. I'm sure everyone would love to hear one.
Well, you're a white boy from Westchester, and you're in New York, and you're now with the Panthers, and I use the word, they were ferocious. They were aloof. They were strong. They were focused. They didn't have any time for any bull. And so they would have a class to try to educate us white folk into understanding some of Mao's dictums, political power comes out of the barrel of a gun, or America is a paper tiger. And then they would ask us, of course, and the foggiest idea what I didn't understand political power comes out of the barrel of the gun. And now, of course, everybody would understand and see that political power does come out of the barrel of a gun, and it's always somebody else. It's not the black, it's not people of color. It's the other way around. That's how it manifests themselves in a proto-fascist state. So I did that, and then there was a split between Eldridge and Bobby and Huey, and COINTELPRO was killing guys especially people who published the paper. They killed the guy in New Haven, and Bobby Seale was on trial for murder in New Haven. And so they decided to get the Minister of Information to come to New York to try to get the two sides together. Mm-hmm. And they asked for a safe house, and I recommended my father's apartment on 230 East 50th Street. And
okay. How'd that work out?
Oh, that was really exciting. They arrived, and there were four of them, a big man, his girlfriend, who was white, three bodyguards, and I had to explain to the doorman that they were friends of my father's and that they would be staying there. And they went upstairs, and as soon as I got up there, they sort of let me know that I had other things to do and I should not be there because they wanted to talk. And I stayed away. My job was to go from phone booth to phone booth to do communications that wouldn't be intercepted. And in the morning, I went back to the apartment, and I walked into the bedroom, and Big Man had his .45 automatic on the bed table. I thought, oh my God, Jesus! When my father comes back, what would he do? So he didn't come back, and Big Man went off to the meeting, which was on 8th Avenue. And of course, the cops had intercepted some communication, and they were there. So Big Man took out his gun and handed it to my friend, whose father was the first violinist at the New York Philharmonic, and got out of the car, was arrested. So I received the communication, we all did, that he had been arrested, and there was the pretrial, the indictment, and it was being read. So we went downtown. William Kunstler was defending Big Man, and I am sitting in the courtroom, and I hear he is being charged with a Sullivan violation, which is the transportation of a weapon across state lines, and he was in possession of this gun. And Kunstler got up and yelled, "No, no, no!" He's screaming at the top, "That's a lie! That's not true!" And of course, I knew it wasn't true because he had handed it to my friend, so it was actually not true. And it was the first time I realized that they lie in court. People under oath, people who prosecute, district attorneys, lawyers for the prosecution, lie through their teeth. It had never occurred to me, so that was the beginning of I started to learn then. So we continued to get the Panther 13 out. And then much later on, I went to Algeria, and I actually had tea with Eldridge. It was very pleasant to me. I think he was pumping me to find out who the hell this guy was, but it was a privilege. I admired him a great deal then.
Wow, that's well, to have tea with Eldridge is amazing. But yeah. How did you feel? Now, this is a little deviation from the original questions, but when you realized at that moment that the judicial system, the court system that we hold in such high esteem, that people lie, like what went through your mind when you actually saw that firsthand, that this is actually what the system does? How did you feel?
Well, it's interesting. I had a good dose of some of America's justice, especially Southern justice, because I went south during the Civil Rights Movement with the Free Southern Theater, which was sponsored by SNCC. And I was in Mississippi when a friend of mine that I went to high school with, Mickey Schwerner, and two other civil rights workers were taken and killed. So we knew as we were traveling around, going from one place to another, that 3 civil rights workers were missing, but I didn't know it was Mickey. So we played places like Greenville and Indianola, and actually at Indianola, Fannie Lou Hamer came. And we were doing two plays, Pearly Victorious, which is a boulevard play, and very enjoyable play, which the people of Mississippi that we were playing to thought was sort of silly. And then we were doing Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. They had never seen a play. They didn't have television. They didn't get to go to the movies. And they were listening to some of the most abstract and dense dialogue. And we presented the first act of the play. And then in the intermission, Fannie Lou Hamer got up and she turned around to the assembled audience and said, I want you to pay close attention to this play, because we're not like those two guys. We're not waiting on anyone or for anyone. We're taking this into our own hands. This is about our empowerment, which was the whole point of the reason that the two founders of the Free Southern Theater, John O'Neill and Moses Gunn, was to as people got a sense that they were participating in our democracy by being able to vote, to understand that culturally they also had a voice and that they should be heard and they should enter into the dialogue with these very strange to them and foreign art forms, and learn to be familiar with and expressive of, to make their own theaters, to make Robey theaters, so it was theirs, not something that we brought to them, but which came from them.
I like that. I like that. Do you think, I mean, I hope that it resonated with them and that they actually followed through with that.
They loved it, man. They really loved it. Now, the thing is, I directed the play and I played Pazzo, but I didn't really understand the play. It was, I had tried it in college, and it was one of the reasons that I left my college. But I could not wrap my head around this abstraction. I didn't know at that point that it's not really an abstraction, that it's real. But I should have known, because we rehearsed in New Orleans in a church, a black church. And the minister came, after watching a rehearsal, the minister came up to me and said, Pazzo is as tied to Lucky as Lucky is tied to Pazzo. And it was like a bolt of lightning. To understand the play, to understand that the person who enslaves another person is also enslaved. They become dependent on the other person. They measure themselves against the other person. And yet that whole exchange is so violating of their own self-worth that they, of course, overcompensate and become. That's where the violence comes from. From ignorance and a sense of the incredible moral wrong that's being perpetrated by them on someone else, which was the beginning of my understanding of what Beckett, actually in Beckett's play, those two guys were either homosexuals or they were some way involved politically. They had to leave Paris and go to the south of France to avoid the Nazis, but they were in Vichy, France. And so the Vichy, the fascists in the south of France, did pursue them. They did live off the road. They did not sleep. They were always afraid of being attacked, and they always hoped that some French farmer would say, out of his, the goodness of his heart, say, sleep in my barn. And of course, it rarely happened because it put the farmer at incredible risk. But so you see that Beckett has couched this real event, and that this real event has pertinence. It's not an abstraction. It's not theater of the absurd. It's a real play about what's happening to real people when they confront fascism. That's why it's such a good play. And I learned, but my first lesson was from a minister who had never even heard of Beckett. He only had to look at the image, and he understood the image in its complexity that I'm sure Beckett understood, but he never wrote about.
Wow. I guess that was a real eye-opening experience for you.
The whole experience of I I did this play. I got the job because my father cut a little squib out of the New York Times that there was a theater touring the South. I didn't know anything about the South. I went south, got off the plane, was met by John O'Neill. He took me to the place we were staying in the quarter, and on the side of the building, it had coloreds only. And I thought, oh, isn't that quaint? That's a historical sign from probably the Civil War period. Went upstairs, met the woman who owned the house. We went in. John said, let's go to dinner. Went to dinner. The owner of the restaurant came over and said, I'm sorry, I can't serve you. Well, I'd never been thrown out of a restaurant before. So I balled up my fist and started saying, John said, no. Informed the guy that he was violating our civil rights. And I began to understand that I was in a completely different environment in which my membership of the club, my white skin, did not count unless I held the same beliefs that were prevalent in the South. And it took me I actually went into the white community with flyers to publicize the play, and I handed it to a woman in a drugstore, and she said, oh, thank you very, very much, until she read where it was, and then she sort of gathered her daughter and went to the other end of the store. And then I went to a white church, and I went up to the deacon who was standing outside having a cigarette, and I said, listen, we're putting on a play. It's a really good play. It's called Waiting for Godot. Would you mind if I put the flyers? He said, no, put them here. Give me one. Let me look at it. Well, he looked at it, then he disappeared into the church, and all of the deacons came out, and they're chasing me down the street.
No.
And we played our first introduction. I tend to talk a lot, but we played in Macomb. And as we entered Macomb, the church had been bombed, and we went to the Freedom House. There were more black people than I had ever seen in my entire life, mostly men, standing around listening to a 13-year-old girl describe how she had been kicked, spat upon, and beaten trying to integrate the lunch counter. I can't tell you what that's like. All your illusions go at once. You're just bereft. You do not understand you do not understand the values that you have supposedly learned in school from the very beginning about. We hold these truths to be self-evident, and you understand that they are not self-evident, that there's a struggle involved, that there's always been a struggle, that it continues to be a struggle, and you just get it like a whack. And that's and then it went. And I'll tell you one more story because it's really
it's okay. I love the stories. We love the stories.
We played. I was trying to make the play more accessible to an audience that I was not sure understood the subtleties of the play. So I decided that the white folk would wear blackface, and John O'Neill and Gil Moses would wear a whiteface, which was incredibly stupid. But at the end of the play, I would ask them, so what did you think about this? And da-da-da. And did you think Godot was coming? And a woman in the back row, an older woman, who had a black glove, evidently her Sunday gloves were in the wash, but to all formal occasions, she wore gloves, and she raised her hand. And I said, did you think that Godot was coming? And she said, no. And she sounded so definite. I said, well, why not? She said, I looked in the program and his name wasn't listed. I think that even Beckett didn't think of that when he wrote Waiting for Godot, that if he's not in the program, he ain't coming.
He ain't coming. That was basic.
So I learned a lot of lessons, many, over and over and over again, from people who let us eat in their store when they knew that it would, if somebody caught us in there, that was going to be very bad. For the courage of people, even to show up to the theater. The people who came down to register, people like Mickey and Schwerner and Goodman, who risked their lives. It was just an extraordinary, empowering time, which I'm very grateful that I was there. Ignorant and misguided though I was. it's a wonderful way to learn the truth behind the illusion of your freedom, of your rights, and of your democracy, that it's a sham.
I'm sure. I'm sure that's quite a way to learn that. And it really is. I mean, let me ask you this. From what you can speak of it, like, what do you think that the Black Panthers of that time would think about the circumstances of today?
I think if the Black Panther Party had continued and not been infiltrated by COINTELPRO and destroyed itself because they managed to divide the founders, and then they really went after the Panthers in every possible way. The Panthers, as I learned even much later when I was in Stratford, and we put on a guerrilla theater piece. They organized the entire community. They had the shoe program, the school program, they had food programs. They were organizing everybody. And as a matter of fact, when I was in Connecticut, I heard that there were towns in New Jersey and Connecticut that actually called the Panthers to ask them to come because they were so concerned with the proliferation of drugs, which, as we now know, were probably coming from the police or from COINTELPRO or whatever. And they thought that the Panthers would use their power because they had power. The power was that they took the Second Amendment seriously and understood it applied to them as well as to white folk. So I think if they had continued, which of course is impossible given the nature of the United States government,
right.
But of course there would have been a standoff, and I mean a real standoff, because the Panthers would have been armed and they would have protected those communities, and they wouldn't have grabbed people off the street, and they wouldn't have shot that guy 7 times in the back, and they wouldn't have done it. The Panthers would have been there, and there would have been hell to pay.
Now, do you think, and it's really hard to guess this, but do you think that the Panthers and the Black Lives Matter movements, they would be able to work together? And
absolutely. Absolutely. I think Bobby Seale probably, I think, I don't know enough about what happened to Eldridge at the end, and I never met Huey, but Bobby was a real revolutionary. Mm-hmm. And when you have a revolutionary movement, and Black Lives Matter is a revolutionary movement.
It is.
It is. And the question is, the difference now is, it was fairly straightforward. When they killed Fred Hampton in Chicago, they did the same thing then, but the undermining and the infiltration and the propaganda was not as sophisticated as it is now. And the fear is that they will go after Black Lives Matter, and they may infiltrate it and cause it. I mean, look what's happening with Antifa. I mean, Antifa now the word has been co-opted. They don't understand that it's anti-fascist.
Exactly.
And they don't understand that no violence has been attributed to Antifa or marginal. And they use that, and they now created this shibboleth on the left that they can use as a straw dog to attack any kind of protest. So not only are they suppressing Black Lives Matter, but they're also arresting white people and charging them with terrorism. So the revolution hopefully will be nonviolent, but the violence will not come from the left. The violence will come from the reaction of the right. And the more powerful our statement is nonviolently, the more articulated it is, which the Panthers were really great at, the more white people, ordinary white people, begin to understand that what people of color are asking for, they are also being deprived of. They just don't know it yet because they drank the Kool-Aid. When they understand that, the numbers will be incredible. And then you have to see how power manifests, whether they turn the tanks and the guns the way they do against the Palestinians, the way they do against the demonstrations in Paris and all the other places, whether they turn on their own people. Then,
James, what is it going to take to get people to understand this? What is it going to take to open their eyes?
Well, now that's really interesting. People who tell the truth, telling the truth as much as possible, bearing witness, and then expressing what is the truth in a way that those people who are inured to the truth, they are walled off from the truth. They only believe what they are told from the person they have abdicated their power to, and that is the theater. That is some way of finding a vehicle, because it's not going to happen inside a building with subscribers and plush seats. It's going to happen the way Free Southern Theater, the way Bread and Puppet Theater, San Francisco Meme Troupe, all those troupes were agitprop theaters. They created plays, short plays that could be done anywhere to inform people. For instance, the one that I really liked was they would send a group of people into a supermarket, and somebody would be blithely picking out meat from the meat counter, and they'd say, "Do you know what's in that meat?" And the customer would say, "No, why? Is there something in there?" Said, "Yeah, actually, it's full of growth hormones and antibiotics. And by the way, do you know how it's raised? Do you know that they're raised in these pens?" And they would get into a conversation. The information would be flowing. Then another member of the company would come and pretend to be outraged by this. And they would start this argument, and people from all over the market would collect around them to hear this argument, people talking about something that had meaning that they just thought mindlessly it's just meat. What's wrong? It's just meat. But it isn't just meat. It's politics. It's reality. It's oppression. It's the end of the planet right now. So those are the kind of things that I think if we could do, and everybody get paid enough money to live on, then we could bring that theater the way Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland during the Vietnam War brought their play to military bases. They didn't play on the bases, of course. They played in the towns, and they invited not only soldiers on leave, but also townspeople. And they were informing them. They were educating them. They were helping them to identify with the people of Vietnam who were suffering this aggression, this oppression by this mammoth empire. And I think it was very effective, and I think that's why they loathe her so much, never forgave her, not for her trip to North Vietnam, but because she was effective.
Now, have you ever considered getting something? This is the Robey Theatre Company, and this is what we do. Yeah. So we're just putting it out there a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. There's a couple of wonderful books, Theater of Cruelty by Augusta Boal, which is about how you do plays in a community and involve the community in the entirety of the process. And you make the play about some issue that's in the community that they want to deal with. When you think, I go to jail a lot, but I went to jail up here because we protested a frack gas-fired power plant, and we did everything. We did everything legitimately that you can do. Petition, went to the governor's office, sat in, marched. We did everything. Nothing changed at all. And I suggested, why don't we do an act of civil disobedience? So we chained ourselves together by the neck to block the trucks from coming in. We were arrested. We were tried. The necessity defense was not allowed, which is, that the evil that you are opposing is so much greater than the law that you are breaking, that there's no reason why that law should be applied, because the consequences of what you are protesting against are so dire. So they didn't allow that. We were found guilty and we were asked to pay a fine. And I said, I'm not paying the fine. So 3 of us went to jail for a very short time. But I want to tell you, once you go, and it wasn't a jail, it was a prison. So I was in lockup. I was in solitary until my TB test came back. I did a hunger strike. The women who were with me, who were in the women's part, they didn't do that, but they got the rough end. They didn't get towels. They didn't get a call to do a shower. So they started their shit but they couldn't do it with me, because right away they recognized me. And they knew it was going to be, and the guys I was not allowed to see anybody. So when I went to make my telephone call, nobody could be outside. And when I walked to meet somebody who came to visit me, everybody had to be off the floor for the entire prison. But a guy watching me pass said, hey, you're in the newspaper, because he had seen the newspaper that I had been arrested and what we were doing. So they knew that they couldn't pull that with me. So our TB test came back negative. And the next day we were to go into general population, which I very much wanted to do in my naivete. And they realized, because in prison, how you make your chops is you beat the crap out of somebody, and the higher status they have, the higher your status go. What better than to beat up some Hollywood actor? So the authorities decided, no, maybe it's better that we get him out. So they let us out.
Yeah.
So I didn't get into general population, and of course it probably would have been pretty dangerous for me.
Yeah.
But I learned what that. I actually, when you go in, they sit you down in front of a desk, and a guy high above starts to ask you these questions, and they're mostly, pro forma questions. But he said, "Are you afraid of being raped?" And I thought it was a joke. I said, "Not unless they're a lot hornier than I think they are." He didn't laugh, and then he said to me, "Are you afraid you'll rape someone?" I thought, what? Now, what he was telling me was, there are only 2 choices in prison. You either get raped or you rape. If you don't rape, then you lose your status. Then you become the object. So those are the little kind of things that you learn, that the dysfunction that exists in society, the inequity, the injustice that exists outside, the complicity of the capitalist system is, which we know from the work of wonderful people about prison reform. This is heightened in prison. It's exacerbated in prison. It's taken for granted in prison. They are warehousing the best and brightest, who would be the best and brightest and the most effective if they had the kind of education they deserve, if they didn't have to worry about where the next meal was coming from, if they weren't hassled by police every time they walked down the street, there would be a different group of people in these communities of color.
Absolutely. They absolutely would. Wow. We just need more people to let people know these things. I'm going to switch. Go ahead.
Well, that's our responsibility as artists. Mm-hmm. It said, hold the mirror up to nature to form her own image, virtue her own, whatever that wonderful quote, which I've forgotten. But the hold the mirror up is for the audience to see themselves. Well, in so much theater, I just did a play in New York, in so much theater, although Black people go to the theater more, when you think of the price of those tickets, and you think of the number of people who would enjoy, and it's important for them to see it, who can't go to those things. We have to create, and can't say, well, we'll let Broadway do it, or wonderful playwrights. We had a wonderful playwright. But it has to be somebody who relates to the issues. As I brought up the thing about protesting, that's a play. What we did is a play. What the truth is about the complicity of the Cuomo administration in the licensing of that plant, what that plant really represents in terms of global warming and climate change, and that it's placed in the Black community so that all the smoke and poisons and the toluenes and the ultrafine particulate matter that comes lands on where people raise their children. If they knew that, if they could relate to that, if we could come up with you can do this, you don't have to take this, you can resist, come with us and resist. We just scared them away. I went around with pamphlets in the community, broadsheets trying to get, and they just thought I was a nut. What was I doing? They didn't understand at all the context. I couldn't even get them interested because no white man ever came to their community with something to offer to empower them. So they thought, no, it's just a guy coming, he's flogging something. You have to come in a way, you have to draw them out into a theater experience, into an abstraction. You have to entertain them. And then you turn the mirror so that they see themselves. And they say, oh, I understand that. They did that to me.
Uh-huh. That's what we have to do.
Yeah.
Exactly what we have to do. Now, you were quoted in, let me pull up my notes here. You were quoted in Los Angeles Downtown News Magazine. And you said that Robey Theater is an important theater. Can you expound on this statement just a little bit?
Well, I would amend it. It's the most important theater.
Thank you.
Any theater by people of color, by people who are facing oppression, occupation in their own community, have a different perspective, a different view, a different awareness. That awareness is lost on white people of privilege who can afford to sit in those seats, go to the restaurant beforehand, park their car, drive it out to Westchester. So they don't understand how people of color are experiencing the world that they think does not, if they think it exists over there. It doesn't affect us. But in actual fact, it does affect us. First of all, Shakespeare said, they cannot see because they do not feel. First thing we have to do is to get people who don't understand this to feel the pain, to feel the anger, to feel the indignation, to feel the fury of what it means to be a person of color in their community. Like the wonderful woman said, they accuse us of destroying our community. This is not our community. CVS is not our community. Walmart's not our community. That's imposed on us. So there's a very interesting lesson. Just because a group of people happen to live together in a particular neighborhood doesn't make them a community if they attack the symbols of oppression that are spread throughout the community, taking advantage and ripping the community off. So I think we have to educate white people, and it has to come from somebody who has experience, who when they talk the talk, they understand it because they've walked the walk. Mm-hmm. It's not just it can't be just, that's the thing about that kind of theater. It can't be just an act. It has to be really felt. It has to come from the heart. And, they don't do these plays on Broadway or off Broadway. They don't do these things that illuminate, that point the finger, that say, what is the root cause? What is the root cause of racism? I listened to this wonderful woman, what's her name? Barbara, just written a book. She wants to start a Marshall Plan. She was on Democracy Now! And she calls it the Hamer, Emmylou, oh geez, I had that, hold on a second. Oh, it's Barbara Smith, How to Dismantle White white supremacy. And she meant by white supremacy, not white supremacists. She means the entire system. And she calls this Marshall Plan, the Hamer Baker, and it's from Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker. And it is an idea that sort of embodies the idea that restitution is owed for the resources that have been withheld from communities of color, especially Black communities, that reparations are paid, which would allow them to address. It's part of the defunding of the police, which is not which white people have, because it's been misrepresented, believe means taking the money away, all the money away, and dismantling the police. It does not mean that. It means taking away those things that the police are not trained to do, so they don't wind up confronting somebody with a mental illness and then lose their patience because they're basically scared out of their death, their lives, confronting these people. So that's a play. These are all opportunities to inform people. Why do you have the reaction to the shooting of Breonna? Why is that? What are the ramifications? How does American justice, what's the interface? What's it like for a Black person accused of a petty, nonviolent crime who then gets into a system where you have plea bargaining, all the stuff that we know, but white people understand it intellectually. They've heard the argument, but they haven't felt the feelings.
Right.
They don't know the fear. They don't know the anger. They don't know why somebody in that circumstance would turn around to the cop and say, "Hey, man, give me a break." It's what Eric Garner said. Don't stop hassling me. Don't hassle me.
Right.
Yeah.
I think now, well, let me ask you again. We're kind of deviating because it's a conversation, but this is just such interesting conversation. What she's saying. Have you read the whole book?
No, it's just come out. I just saw it today. I'm going to get it.
Okay.
She's about organizing. That's why, because Fannie Lou Hamer was an organizer, and so was Emma. What's her name? Baker. Ella Baker.
Ella Baker.
So it's about organizing. It's always strange because I'm a privileged white quasi movie star. What do you know? What community are you representing? I can represent something as an actor. I can be in the play. I can be the image of the corporatist, of the CEO, of where the oppression begins from. That's my role. I have to play that role, and I have to play it convincingly and in a way they can understand it and then laugh at it and then say, "Oh yeah, but gee, when you think of that, maybe that is Jeff Bezos. Wow, all those people in those warehouses." Yeah.
Well, first, you are a major movie star, not quasi by any stretch. You're a brilliant actor. You really are, Jamie. And I think these things that you're bringing to ideas, I think they will hopefully do something if the right people listen to them. And that's what's the important thing. I mean, it has to it's just as you said, if it's right there. I like that idea of the grocery store. I love that. I mean, these are the kind of things that's something to get people's attention, because watching the news and watching television, that's reading whatever, that's giving the misinformation. That's where all of this wrong stuff is starting. So what we have to do is come in and affect change. So now, one of my other questions is that, a lot of people may not have known this before, but I'm sure they know it now, that just like our namesake Paul Robeson, you're an activist, an actor, and a humanitarian. And so a couple of questions. As an actor, do you happen to have a favorite piece that Paul performed?
I was thinking about it. I went to a prep school in Pennsylvania. I knew nothing of Paul Robeson. I left California when my parents got divorced when I was 6. So I didn't really see his career in Hollywood. But we were in class reading at the same, what's the Benet, who wrote John Brown's Body. And so I'm sure they played a recording of Robeson singing John Brown's Body and Old Man River. And there is the changes that he made to the lyric of the song, where he took out the line of desperation and resignation and put in a line of rebellion and fury. And I know that song, I heard him sing, which was indelible when you hear him sing. So I heard him sing, but I didn't understand any context. I didn't understand who he was. I didn't understand what he was working for. And then a lot of little things happened. My father was a director in Hollywood, and he was blacklisted at about the same time as Robeson was blacklisted for no reason. He didn't suffer nearly as much as Robeson. Unbelievable. Now there's a play. Why isn't that play done? The story of what Robeson did at the hands of the federal government, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the FBI, and all the other engines of repression, what they did to that human being, like they did to Jack Johnson. But Paul Robeson, who was a national treasure. Then I studied in New York with Herbert Berghoff and Uta Hagen, and Uta was Desdemona to Paul's last performance of Othello, and they were very close friends with Jose Ferrer. And Jose Ferrer thought that Robeson and Uta were having an affair, and so he ratted them out to the committee, and that's one of the reasons that Robeson had to leave. So in sort of on an outside way, I unfortunately never saw him. I think I saw him singing in a documentary, in a film clip, but I never saw him on stage, which I really would love to have. And I, of course, never got a chance to meet him. But it's funny how when you move, as I always think of myself as Zelig. I mean, I was there. I don't know how much I contributed, but I was there sort of on my journey learning. But you understand that there's another really huge ship plowing in the same direction, which passes you on the port side and goes off into the nights with lights blazing. And that's your beacon. Follow that. And on that ship was Paul Robeson. And I was in the boat that was behind following.
But the point is, you were in the boat. And
I was in the boat. I was in the boat.
You were not on the shore. You were in the boat.
I was in the boat.
Right there. Now, I think that your father was a type of hero. Just even allowing the Black Panthers to come into his apartment.
Oh, that part he never knew. No, I didn't know. I thought he was a hero because he testified. He testified the same day as Bertolt Brecht. Bertolt Brecht, who was a communist, was so adroit in his testimony that at the end of his testimony, they gave him a commendation for his cooperation. He left the hearing room, went down the steps outside, got in a cab, went directly to the airport, and flew to East Germany. He didn't even go home. My father, who had come to LA in 29, before the communists really got started, my mother, one of my mothers, I had two because I was big, she was in the group theater. And the group theater, a lot of people, Morris, lots of people from the group theater, because it was the organization that was addressing the issues, the taxi strike, Kazan, they were all there waiting for Lefty, when he put up his fist. Kazan put up his fist. the guy who ratted them out, put up his fist and said, "Strike!" And so he said, "I have nothing to say." They didn't have anything on him. He was one of the first presidents. Well, he was the president of the Directors Guild, and he had belonged to an organization called the Hollywood Democrats. He left them. They moved slightly to the left. They became progressive. And my father held a party at his house, and there were 4 members of the Moscow Art Theater that was touring. And they were explaining to my father and the assembled guests that when you graduated from the conservatory in Russia as a young artist, you were sent to the provinces, and you worked your way in year by year to Moscow, so that the provinces got the best young talent. And then the talent itself, the artist himself, learned his craft and learned what it was that he was doing with his craft as he moved in, so that he was ready to stand on the stage at the Moscow Art Theater and do Chekhov. And my father said, "Oh, that is wonderful. And look what we do in this country. We take the best and brightest from Yale and Carnegie and Northwestern, and we send them to Hollywood or to Broadway, and they're used up in 1 year. If they're lucky, they get a job, and then they're never heard of. Somebody else comes and Adolphe Maju heard him. And about a month later, my father opened Life magazine, and there was a House Un-American Activities in Hollywood, and there were a series of photographs along the top. Adolphe Maju testifies before HUAC that the biggest communist in all of Hollywood is John Cromwell. So that's the reason that they called him in. They asked him after the testimony if he would, that nothing was wrong, there would be nothing, no problem, if he would come and apologize to the committee. And his agent, Sam Jaffe, wonderful agent, said, "You're not going to get John Cromwell to apologize." So my father had signed a contract with Dory Sherry at RKO, and Dory had sold the studio to Howard Hughes, who was a rabid anti-communist. So in order to get rid of my father, he gave my father a script that my father was contractually obligated to do, which was called "I Married a Communist." My father understood what Hughes was doing and said, yeah, I'll shoot the picture, but I can't shoot this. This is horrible. That thing had been kicking around for years. Nobody wanted to touch it. So they got writer after writer after writer after writer. They couldn't do it. So they paid my father the full $1 million of his contract. Howard Hughes owed $1 million, which was a lot in '53, handed him the check. My father bought a building in Beverly Hills, moved to New York, got in a play called Sabrina Fair, won a Tony for another play with Henry Fonda called Point of No Return. Did a lot of plays in New York. So he did very well. My mother, not so much so. She really should have been Linda in Death of a Salesman. Quintero, Kazan wanted Ruth to do it, but Ruth had to stay because my father was going to the committee and was really tense. So it affected him tangentially, but a lot of people, it ruined their lives. And one of those people was, unfortunately, Paul Robeson. So the theater is really important, not only because it carries his name, it carries the values that he lived by, and it is an opportunity to use the theater craft of wonderful actors who do not get enough work in this industry in Hollywood to use their talent to make a difference right away in the community, to educate their community, to empower their community. All the things that John O'Neill and Gil Moses wanted from the Free Southern Theater.
Yeah, and that actually goes into another thing, what I wanted to talk about before we go to the questions from the audience, because the world has changed so much in the last 6 months, and we're getting used to our new norm of live theater. Won't be ready until mid next year. So, what advice or words of encouragement can you give to us as actors at this time?
These theaters are small, self-sustained, tightly knit communities of artists, all working for the same goal: the explication and representation of what a just society looks like. So there's no reason why people can't pick their friends, come together, do what Joint Stock did in England, decide democratically what issue they think the community needs to see. Create. Now, what they did in Joint Stock in England was, when they decided on a subject like potato farmers in the north of England, the company would go out to the potato farmers. They would work with the potato farmers for a pretty long period. And then they would come back and they would begin to improvise those scenes that they had remembered, what it was like in the field, what it was like when you went to their home, how they organized, what was their relationship to the union, what did the owners, how did they react to this? And they created a play. And then when they got it, the scenes so that they had a form, then they would call in the playwright. The playwright would only tighten the organization of the scenes to create an arc to the scene, to give it a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then once they had done that, then they called in the director. So when the director from the outside, because you really do need a director, when the director from the outside would say, no, when you come in, I want you to cross over to the fireplace and sit in that chair. The actor that he says that to knows that that's never done by that character. That character always sits at the other table because that seat is reserved for the patriarch of the family, who always eats before and alone by himself, and then sits by the fire as the rest of the family is served. That's the way it's done. So you have a theater which is democratically informed, where everyone has an equal voice, and where they are, as I say, committed to an ideal, not about their careers, not about whether this is going to be seen by people who will give them then another job. No, their commitment is, we are going to inform, to entertain, to engage, and to enlighten the community that we understand, that is our community, about the issues and what they can do about those issues.
I love it. I think let's get it done. Let's do it.
Great.
I think it's fantastic. Well, with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. Yeah. And our first question is from Garen. Now, before we take Garen's question, I'm going to ask everyone if you could kindly type in capital letters, I have a question in chat, and they will be answered as they are, as we receive them. So our first question is from Garen.
Yes,
Garen,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you to the Robey Theatre for the session. And Mr. Cromwell, thank you very much for being here. And to be honest with you, my comment was basically, since you did a movie 4 years ago about the Armenian genocide, playing Ambassador Morgenthau. And I wanted to thank you very much. I know it's 4 years late, but since it's on Netflix, I have two friends who are not Armenian. They mentioned it and they really liked it. And to be honest with you, what Christian Bale's character said in terms of Black Lives Matter and what's going on right now, I mean, you have the media, you have the activists, and back then, 105 years ago, you only had the media. All you had was the journalist trying to make sure that the Armenian genocide was not forgotten. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Garen. Thank you for sharing. Our next question is from Kat Kramer. Kat, please unmute your microphone. Take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the Robey Theatre Company for doing this, and also Jamie for being here. I also had a question about a film that you did, the film Marshall, with the late Chadwick Boseman.
Yes.
And that was a powerful film. I almost feel that it could be a play. But what was your experience working with him, and your experience working on that film, which was very powerful, and I've seen it 3 times.
Great. Yeah, it's a really good story. My part was a minor part. I was the judge. I had sort of a pivotal scene. And I got there, and the company had been shooting for a long time. So they were all, Josh and Chadwick and the whole company had sort of gelled, you know. And I felt a little on the outside. So, and sitting up on the judge's bench, I sort of got to look at this trial as it unfolded. And, you know, you finish a scene, you hear cut, and then the actors relax in the way that they do. And you couldn't help but be drawn to Chadwick because of his presence. I didn't know, no one on the set knew what he was going through, that he already knew he had cancer. It was never, I mean, it didn't enter the conversation. Nobody, you wouldn't think this. I had not seen 42. I certainly had not seen any of the Marvel films that he did. It's just not my kind of film. So this was a fresh face. And what was interesting, I thought, was Marshall in the courtroom was forbidden by the judge to address the court or any witness. And so he had to remain in the court and sort of shepherd Josh's character, this small town litigant. And it was wonderful to watch the communication and the presence and the force of a silent performance, how he wove it in, how he kept the connection, even though the camera was not necessarily on him, and when he came to him, that he was always present, he was always there. It's so easy to, when you're faced with that, to let your attention flag, and he did not. So his dedication to his craft, obviously from all that he did and all that he said, his dedication to the cause that he very much believed in. He was not a movie star. He was an icon. He was a hero. He transcended just being a movie star because of what he stood for, and that he presented to the Black community that when they looked at him, they saw themselves. They saw the possibility of their lives, what they could become, that nothing could stand in your way if you wanted it badly enough. Things would stand in the way, but for all of us, they stand in the way. And he was internationally recognized. You can see from the outpouring of grief from all over the world who understand and sympathize with the loss of someone of real stature, like any extraordinary, why does that, I don't know why that his name always goes out of my head, but he was really a hero.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Kat, for your question. We have another question from Mr. Stephen Blackburn. Stephen, please unmute your microphone and take it away.
Stephen,
are you there?
Yeah, I can see him. He's looking right at it. You see where it says unmute? It's a little button on the
Looks
screen.
like a microphone.
Looks like a mic, yeah.
Can't do it? Okay, well, while Stephen, oh, you got it, Stephen?
Yeah. Is that it?
There you go, Steve. Oh, well, We still can't hear you. We see your mouth move. Oh, you can hear me. We see your mouth moving, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, I sympathize. I'm a lot.
Well, Jamie, while Steven figures that out, let me ask you, I want to ask you about your t-shirt.
Oh.
The t-shirt you chose to wear today.
I went down to the March in Washington, one of the first ones. It may have been for the inauguration. I was sort of on the periphery of that, but it also may have been at the Women's March because I went to that too, which was an incredible march. And I was talking to some Black Lives Matter, and they gave it to me. I was really chuffed, and I wear it with great pride, and it is really wonderful because I often wear a little sort of I like these caps that you get from Azerbaijan, and I guess they look like a kepi, or they look like a Muslim thing, so they can never understand this white guy with a Muslim cap with a Black Lives Matter trying to figure out who the hell is that guy.
I bet.
So this is, it's really interesting because this has been, since I was young, and those wonderful Olympic athletes, Carlos and I've forgotten the other guy's name, and they raised their fists. Mexico, and that's another enlightening moment, because the question was that none of us understood was why. What does that mean? Which I suppose many people like me, when players started taking the knee, when Kaepernick took the knee, they looked at it and they knew it was something, but they didn't know what it meant. And of course, then it got twisted, as everything does, by the corporate media, which then perverts the real meaning of it. So that the other day at the start of that game between Texas and who'd they play? They played the champions, Kansas City. Okay. They all linked hands. It was really incredible. And that stupid, not stupid, misinformed.
Go ahead, say it.
Unfeeling. It's no good to blame people who are victims of. They have been destroyed by the same system that actually, in many ways, have empowered Black people to maintain their identity and their strength and their community. The same thing was applied to poor white people. Not poor white people, middle class, because there's really the middle class is eroded. But anyway, so I believe that they're victims of this, but they booed. Did they not understand what they were after, with all the violence, with all the killing? They didn't understand that these guys who understand their privilege and they want to give back and they want to show that they're not just athletes, that they are human beings, that they're citizens, that they are proud of who they are, and they're proud of their people, and they're proud of their community. Why would you boo them? That just shows you how deeply, deeply, deeply misguided and misinformed they are.
It's such a travesty, because because the news is the information source, but people don't really realize where that information source is getting their information. They don't really. I've had to have this conversation numerous times, like about vaccines and pharmaceuticals and the news. I said, all you have to do to see who's paying for the news is look at the commercials. Those are the people who are giving and trust and believe. They definitely have an input on what you're being told because they're paying for it. So you cannot believe everything, especially that you see on mainstream news. Now, there's some organizations where you can have real information, but the general population, it's just going to be misinformation. And it's just so absolutely aggravating. That's why I love these conversations with people who are informed and enlightened, who can give information.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what Cornel West and the people who are trying to put together a new party. I mean, I love Cornel West.
I do too.
I just think he's the best. And I love it also that he always extends his compassion and calls even those people who are totally against him, my brother, my sister, which is glorious. It's glorious. He understands how powerful that is. Mm-hmm. I am still connected to you as human to human, even though we disagree politically. We can talk about our politics, but the love between us as fellow human beings will always exist for me. And I know you know that too. And it's great.
It really is. And you know what? And this is an aside, but I have a really dear friend of mine. She happens to love a certain individual who happens to be in office, and we have differing political affiliations. Yeah. And so we go at it, but I've known her for almost 10 years, and you know, my tears are watering up only because she's so dear to me. She's such a good friend. And I just love her to pieces, but doggone it, we come to blows when we talk politics. It's a whole because she has a shirt and a hat. I just don't understand. Mm-hmm. But there's still that love as human being to human being. And I think if all of us could really just get to that, you know, this is about you, but yesterday I had to get some blood drawn, and you just want to see this big old bruise. That's me. Yeah, I had 8 vials of blood for some blood work. And yeah, it was ridiculous. And it would just occur to me at that moment when I saw all of my vials sitting there at the Kaiser thing, my blood is the same, like we all have the same blood. It is all the same color. It's all the same. Why can't we just get along? We're all human beings in this together. It's
it's the right question. It's getting them to hear the answer.
That is it. Well, you know, Stephen has rejoined us. Stephen, can you hear us?
The question is, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, my mic wasn't working on the Zoom, so I had to reboot the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Speaking of blood, I want to get to my question for you, Mr. Cromwell, but Millena, you know, you were talking about the blood, and it was red and this, that, and the other. I was diagnosed with AML in 2017, and I eventually needed to get a blood marrow transplant to survive. Well, my brother, who was the only family option, was a zero match. And so they went to Be the Match. And I have to tell anybody who's interested in possibly saving a life, sign up for Be the Match, because I was saved by somebody I didn't even know. Mm. And it turned out he's Japanese American. My brother was a zero match. My blood that saved the stem cells that saved my life were from a Japanese American. So just goes to show you that humans are humans. But Mr. Cromwell, what I wanted to ask you is, have you seen the movie or heard of the movie that's on Netflix now? It's a documentary called Crip Camp.
I have not.
I recommend it to everybody. It's about it starts out about a camp for disabled kids it was started in 1951, but the movie picks up in 1970 when hippies had taken it over, and these kids all found what they'd all been treated poorly, most of them, by society through their lives. A number of them from that camp went on to become the moving forces behind the what became the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. And it started out, they were protesting in Berkeley, I believe it was, and they did a sit-in. So these are people that some of them need, you know, catheter bags. They need people. Anyway, they weren't getting any help. Weren't even getting coverage from the media, except for one reporter at the time. But the Black Panthers came in and gave them food. And this woman who was a paraplegic that was white, that was the leader of this group, said, "Why are you helping?" He said, "Well, you're trying to improve the society, so we want to help you." And I thought that was fascinating. Never heard that story before.
Yeah. There are a lot of stories about the Panthers that are like that, that don't get out. They did a lot of great things.
I also remember reading about the Panthers that Reagan didn't become an advocate of gun control until as the Panthers exercised their Second Amendment rights and showed up at the Capitol in Sacramento with guns, which they were allowed to do. And then that's when Reagan started saying, "Oh, why does anybody need to have a blah, blah, blah?"
Yeah. That's our country.
But you should write a memoir. Those stories you have are fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, they really are fascinating. I mean, there's a comment. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. We're glad that you are okay and that you were saved by, that you're saved. Doesn't matter by whom. It's just that you're healthy and that you're here.
Thanks.
So thank you. And Stephen, I apologize. Fred Irvin in chat says, "I think you're an outstanding human being, Jamie."
That's right.
So, well, that's all the questions that we have. If anyone else has any questions, please hurry and type it in. Jamie, do you have any closing words or, words of wisdom, encouragement, anything that you'd like us all to take with us?
I imagine it's very difficult in this time to keep a theater like the Robey Theatre going. There's always costs. I don't know what your situation. I don't know enough about the theater to know how vulnerable it is, but many theaters are very, very vulnerable. No subscription money coming in, rent and taxes to pay. So I would exhort the members of the Robey Theatre to begin to think outside the box and to develop a form which can support them as artists. And by that, I mean that they make a living. It's not much of a living. When I was offered a job in the San Francisco Mime Troupe by a friend of mine who had joined the company that I'd played with in another theater in Minnesota, and she said, I said, "God, you guys, the things that you're doing are so incredible." She said, "Join us." And I looked over my shoulder at my wife and two young children. I said, "How can I do that? I can't do that. I can't. I have to pay for the house." She said, "Well, so we're all unfortunately connected to the system by our supposed obligations, but it still can be done." Unfortunately, I think in the times that are coming, we're all going to have to risk a great deal. Since every institution in this country is failing, we not only have to fight the revolution, we not only have to show up, but we have to begin to think about what kind of a country and what kind of a system and what the kind of a governing idea we want to have. Because the document that we began with, a lot of people will disagree with me, was deeply, deeply flawed to begin with. I happen to be very fond of the Declaration of Independence, but only so far before it shifts, before Jefferson could not resist falling back on his racism against Black people and against Native Americans. But the beginning of it, and the idea that if the government, which is founded to support the people's right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, does not live up to that obligation, that it is the obligation of the citizen to overthrow that government. And since they were in the process of overthrowing a government, in fact, throwing the government out, it does involve revolution, but it can be made. It can be a nonviolent revolution. So we have to think of ourselves as actor revolutionary. And we have to understand what it is we're trying to articulate. And then we have to make a real effort to do it. It can be done anywhere. In the street, theater in the street. It's a revolutionary idea.
Sorry about that. I was having a whole conversation and I was on mute. But you're absolutely right. Thank you for those pointers, for those suggestions. You know, we just did a play, the Robey Theatre Company. We had a play reading on Sunday, and it was featuring Ben and Danny, and it was called Revolutionary Genocide.
Yeah, he told me about that. Ben told me. Yeah, wonderful. That's great. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, Sherry Barrett wants to know, Jamie, have you ever considered running for office?
Oh, no. No, I
have 3 votes.
I have 3 votes. I don't like the 2-party system. I don't like the word politician.
Okay.
I don't like what it stands for. I think they're corrupt. I think it's legalized bribery. I think they're an impediment to what everyone wants. They all know exactly what the American people want, that they want Medicare for all, that they want the Green New Deal, that they want a guaranteed minimum wage, that they want free college education. All those things poll, but they have no intention of living up to that. And you see it in Biden, what Biden is doing, coming out with he's going to give more money to the military and he's not going to stop fracking, because he doesn't have to placate the progressives at all, because he's got us. We have no place else to go. And probably nobody wants to be held responsible for having that jackass elected for another 4 years. So we have to vote, but we're really losing our clout. I agree with Williamson when she said, we got to put our petty evaluations aside and realize the first issue is to get rid of that fascist. And in somewhat, I would agree, but we must not buy into the crap that comes from the Democratic Party. So, in other words, I would never want, having seen a little bit of politics in supporting Dennis Kucinich, I think in every run he made at the presidency, and then supporting Bernie and watching Bernie go down in flame twice, I just think the whole system has to be changed.
It really does. It really does. It needs to be changed. And the first thing that needs to be changed is the Electoral College needs to go. That just needs to be abolished. I don't even understand why that's still even existence. I mean, I agree that they're moving forward by requiring some states to agree with what the popular vote is, but it just all needs to end.
But when you know the history of it, it was put into the Constitution because of slavery.
Right, I know.
Because of the restoration in South, what do they call it? After the Civil War. And it was a way of control of the southern states being able to control so they didn't lose their power in Washington.
Exactly.
Well, that's why they're very reluctant to let it go, because it's an instrument of power.
An instrument of power. Yeah. Well, Fred Irvin wants to know, do you have any movies coming out?
Well, I got a movie. I think it's on. I think they sold it to internet. It's a little called Never Too Late, which is an Australian film, and then I have an Australian. I don't work much in Hollywood anymore because I think I open my mouth too much, and as Sean Penn can attest to, they have long memories. These people, So I was going to do a film in Wales, and because of what happened in England with Batman and Patterson getting COVID, because I think he broke the bubble, they shut down everything. So that's pushed. And then my series starts in New York, supposedly in November. So it'll be really interesting. That's Succession. So I'm going to do the next season of Succession. And it's a really good show. So, but I feel like Jack Palance. I want to get down and do push-ups and say, I ain't dead yet.
No, you're not. You are alive, well, and kicking and ready to work some more. Maybe theater in the streets.
That's the best place to be.
It's a thought. It's a thought. Well, we're just about out of time. I just want to pass it over to our co-founder, Ben Guillory, to see, Ben, if you have anything you'd like to chime in and say. If not, it's okay. I'll take it. Just want to give you that opportunity. Okay, well, guess not. But I'm gonna.
I was on mute. Just a very sincere thank you, Jamie, for coming to Brown. I haven't seen you in actually years.
A long time.
Except your work, of course. But thank you. Thank you. You know, all the things you were saying and what's going on in the country, the hypocrisy that goes on in this country, that is just part and parcel of the culture of the United States of America, is being revealed, and maybe, just maybe, a way to genuinely oppose it, because of the protestations that are global now. And because of social media, just like in the 60s when we saw the hoses being turned on those brothers and sisters in Birmingham, it's exposed.
Yep.
It's exposed. And exposure can lead to a revolution, an effective revolution. So thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me. It's a privilege. God bless you all.
Take care.
God bless you too. And thank you all for tuning in for our event today.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you. We definitely appreciate your support, whether it's just showing up and sharing your gifts, and we always need financial support. So please go to the website. Any donation is appreciated. Nothing is too small. It all is greatly appreciated from the bottom of our hearts, because we need you to keep us going. So thank you again, Jamie, for taking the time out of your tremendously busy schedule and life to just share with us what you learned following that boat. Thank you.